Well, just 3 days to go until the election day in the United States. The polls indicate the presidential candidates are still virtually tied in the critical swing states that will decide the election. For more, let's go across live to VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. She is in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us, Jessica. Millions of Americans have taken advantage of the chance to vote early this election cycle. Do we see any trends in the turnout that can help predict the outcome of the race next week?
Well, so far, more than 66 million Americans have now voted early, that number going up by the day, and I was one of them voting in Virginia today. Trump has encouraged Republicans to vote more early vote, and so we are seeing higher numbers of Republicans vote early than we did 4 years ago, because, of course, that's when he said, don't vote early. Also, we see overall fewer Americans overall voting from last election cycle, voting early, and that could be attributed to just the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic 4 years ago. Now, Reuters polling indicates that Harris is so far leading with blacks, Hispanics, and women, Trump with whites and men. He has increased his share of Hispanics and blacks, but Harris still leads overall in those categories. And in these final days, both of these candidates are really honing in on the Latino vote. They've spent time in Nevada, in Arizona. They'll also spend time in Pennsylvania, which is a critical battleground state with 19 electoral votes for the winner. And that is a key marker, a key bellwether of who will ultimately win the White House.
Okay, all right, Jessica, even though millions of Americans are voting early, these ballots aren't all getting counted early. How could that impact the results of the election?
It likely means we're not going to get a result on election day or even potentially the next morning, because if you remember 4 years ago, it took 4 extra days to get a final result calling Joe Biden the winner. Now we're looking at several of these swing states not even starting to count until election day. If there are court cases or challenges of questions of any kind, recounts, things of that nature, it could drag on for many more days. But at a minimum, we expect that it could take at least 3 or 4 days to get an election result. All of these swing states, again, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, they don't start counting until election day. Some states also, I should point out, they give overseas Americans and military veterans a chance to send their votes in after election day. So again, we're looking at a very tight election, which means every vote has to count, and it could mean that taking the time to count all those extra votes is even more important this year.
Okay, so world leaders are watching to see what happens next. What are the key differences between these two candidates when it comes to resolving the global conflicts?
Yeah, a key question, I think, for global leaders, because they are watching closely, and we've already seen some of them sort of hedge their bets with respect to alliances in particular. It's important to point out that no major war started under President Trump, and he did not get the U.S. involved in additional new armed conflicts. Under Biden, Putin invaded Ukraine, and we did see this outbreak of conflict in Gaza and that bloody campaign that has been launched by Israel in the Middle East. Democrats, though, point out that by the end of his term, Trump's term, U.S. troops were still in Afghanistan, they were still in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, so it's not as though there were no Americans deployed overseas. He has consistently said that he is going to negotiate his way out of any future conflicts, without really being very specific as to how he would do that. And VOA has spoken to some presidential historians who argue that some of Trump's unpredictability in policymaking can really discourage provocative actions on the part of other countries. Meantime, Harris is really seen as a continuation of what we've seen under President Biden, a more traditional diplomat. She supports multilateralism. She supports building alliances to maintain global leadership. One thing, though, both of these leaders have in common, though, analysts say, is that they both acknowledge that the U.S. is no longer the sole world superpower. And that means that the U.S. has to be more careful and specific and targeted in terms of deciding when and if it engages in additional military conflict or deployments overseas. Back to you.
Okay, all right. You spoke about the differences between the two candidates. This is going to be a very significant election. In just about 3 days, the United States is deciding who the president of the country is going to be. Let's take a look. Jessica, request you to stay on with us. Let's tell our viewers the differences, the key differences and the key talking points for the two candidates.
The Fox News decision desk can now project that former Vice President Joe Biden
has been elected President of the United States.
It was supposed to be the end. But when the end came, Donald J. Trump, 45th President of the United States, wasn't ready to admit defeat.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us.
Trump urged supporters to prevent Congress from certifying those results on January 6, 2021.
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
What resulted was a scene previously unimaginable in America that led to his second impeachment. Trump's unwillingness to take no for an answer was on brand for a man who has always spurned convention.
I think what you see is somebody who has incredible confidence in his own intuition.
Russ Buettner and Suzanne Craig are New York Times investigative reporters and co-authors of Lucky Loser, an unflattering look at how Trump fashioned himself into a self-made billionaire.
He has not, since the early 80s, really trusted people who have subject area expertise in almost anything. He will always overrule them to make things the way he wants them to turn out.
Trump's buildings were emblazoned with his name in large gold letters, a brash display of his ambition and self-promotion.
He was worth $200 million when he would talk. It was an interview he gave to the New York Times, and that grew to $1 billion when he was talking to 60 Minutes a decade later.
Trump excelled at drawing attention and cultivating a brand for himself as a deal maker. He made millions licensing his name. But behind the success were troubles. His companies filed for bankruptcy 6 times. His casinos lost money and were shuttered. Trump rebounded with his TV show The Apprentice, which led to his biggest role yet.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
Unapologetic and unfiltered, Trump was a polarizing nationalist candidate.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
As president, Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court justices who helped overturn federal abortion rights.
The U.S. death toll now above 150,000.
In early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic tested Trump. He fast-tracked the development of life-saving vaccines, but he also appeared to suggest that scientists study injecting bleach to kill the virus. With over 9 million Americans infected and a death toll exceeding 230,000, voters that November chose Joe Biden as their next president. Out of office, Trump faced multiple criminal indictments and is the first former president to be a convicted felon. And yet, he has never been more popular than he is now. Surviving 2 assassination attempts this year has only strengthened the bond between him and his supporters.
God has a plan for Trump, and he absolutely was spared for some purpose and reason, and hopefully it's to become the 47th president.
American politics has never been the same since Donald Trump entered the field. And the man who once co-authored The Art of the Comeback may now be engineering one of the biggest in American history. Tina Trin, VOA News, New York.
So, Jessica, we just saw the profile of the former U.S. President Donald Trump. You know, surviving assassination attempt, riding in a garbage truck. There has been a lot that has happened over the last few weeks in the U.S. campaign. What are going to be the key highlights and the talking points and some of the factors for the voters?
I think at this point, so many Americans have voted, but at the same time, there are certainly people who have yet to decide. You've got people in camps on both sides, pretty ardently so, and there's really just about 1% of the electorate that are undecided voters. Depending on whether that will be a factor in whether or not they get to the polls, and the campaign commercials are really going very hot and heavy. In fact, I believe they've spent almost $800 million between the 2 campaigns in the state of Pennsylvania, where they expect to really have a fight on their hands between these 2 campaigns. So the last few days are really filled with that closing message, the idea of that Trump is pushing that Kamala broke it, he will fix it. For Kamala, her closing argument is that she is a better, more moral, and more consistent leader than Donald Trump, that he will bring uncertainty to Americans and to the global stage. And really, you know, the people that are making up their minds are going to make them up on issues like the economy, immigration, reproductive rights, Depending on what issue is most important to that person, they will cast their ballot on November. Or if they feel like they can't vote for either candidate because these are historically unpopular candidates, they may in fact not vote at all.
Okay, all right. Jessica, I request you to stay with us. Let's also take a look at Kamala Harris and the campaign that she has had ahead of the elections.
My mother was a brilliant, 5-foot-tall, brown woman with an accent.
Born in 1964, Kamala Harris's story begins in the diverse and progressive neighborhoods of the San Francisco Bay Area. Her immigrant parents, Shyamala Gopalan from India and Donald Harris from Jamaica, met in Berkeley, California, where the two gifted graduate students arrived to study at the University of California.
Here it is to give you a message of hope.
1960s Berkeley was a center of civil rights and peace activism. Harris has said her earliest memories are of being taken to rallies in a stroller. By 1970, the Harris' marriage had ended. Shyamala Gopalan, with her two daughters, found an apartment to rent in an area of Berkeley known as the Flatlands.
So they lived above the daycare center, above Shelton's daycare, in a modest 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment.
Childhood friend Carol Porter first met Harris at the school bus stop.
We were the second class to desegregate Berkeley Public Schools.
Harris went on to Howard University, a historically black college, and then law school. At a time when record levels of black men were incarcerated in California, she took a job as a prosecutor, a role often viewed negatively in the African American community.
She wanted to go in and change things so that people weren't being prosecuted the way that they were based on systemic and structural racism.
In 2002, Harris took on the incumbent in a race for San Francisco District Attorney.
There had never been a woman district attorney. She was really an underdog. But from the beginning, she had something very special.
Harris won the close race and set to work increasing convictions and prison time for violent offenders, while steering those convicted of first-time nonviolent crimes into her rehabilitation program called Back on Track. Elected Attorney General of California in 2010, she pressured U.S. banks into a $20 billion settlement over deceptive lending practices, took on the cross-border drug trade and human traffickers, and advocated for marriage equality. In 2016, Harris was elected to the U.S. Senate, where she quickly rose as a powerful voice on issues of immigration, healthcare, and criminal justice reform. Known for her sharp questioning during hearings and her ability to hold powerful leaders accountable, Harris became a prominent figure on the national stage. But in a 2020 run for president, Harris's campaign struggled to find direction amid staff chaos.
There's definitely been stories about high staff turnover, inability to keep talented people in her orbit.
Biden won the nomination and ultimately asked Harris to join the ticket as his vice president. The two went on to victory, making her the first woman and the first person of color to win that office. Faced with a surge of migrants attempting to cross the U.S. southern border, Vice President Harris engaged with regional leaders to address instability and poverty. She quickly became a political target.
She was supposed to be the one that was in charge of securing our border, and I don't even know if she's been down there yet.
Harris has grown more comfortable serving as an emissary on the world stage, emphasizing support and soothing tensions. And in a career defined by breaking barriers and exceeding expectations, Harris rose again, becoming the Democratic nominee for president when Joe Biden unexpectedly dropped out of the race.
All right, on that note, we're slipping into a short break here. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with the updates on the U.S. elections and lots more happening in the country. We'll be right back.